Salutations, listeners, and welcome back to Glitch Bottle, the podcast where we uncork the uncommon in magic, mysticism, and the generally misunderstood. I'm your host, Alexander F., and today we are super excited because we're going to be talking about the transmutation of art, magic, tarot, and so much more with artist and practitioner Amelia Passer. Now, listeners, I've been a fan of Amelia's work for many years now at this point, and I know that so many of you listeners have already seen Amelia's highly elegant paintings and art pieces, all infused with this esoteric potency. And Amelia, among many other things, is a multidisciplinary artist, an astrologer, a traveler who is seeking mythos, beauty, and curiosity. And Amelia creates as a form of devotion and fulfillment, drawing inspiration from ritual, magic, and alchemy. And so Amelia, and this is deeply reflected in her wonderful art, is an astrological magic practitioner. And Amelia combines her techniques in oil painting with electional astrology and Western alchemy in order to create talismanic paintings, which we'll definitely talk about. And she pays such deep attention to both the craft of art itself, like the kinetics of art, and also the mystical and esoteric aspects as well. And so Amelia's artwork can be described in so many ways. One of them, and I love this, is a Renaissance remix, blending myth and astrology, as well as motifs from classical art. And Amelia's work often explores the space between knowing and wondering. Amelia graduated from the University of Colorado with a degree in studio arts and religious studies. And Amelia is the creator, and this is so cool, listeners, of a very unique tarot deck composed of the aforementioned talismanic oil paintings. And this deck is called the Astro Magician's Tarot. And you can currently support this during a live Kickstarter campaign that's going on literally right now as we record this in April of 2025. So check out the links below. And we're going to be getting into just all of these things. But with all that being said, Amelia Passer, thank you so much for taking the time and stopping by the Glitch Bottle podcast today.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's such an honor. It's such an honor. I like it. Yeah, it just feels like full circle to be here. I started listening to your podcasts many years ago and was searching for information on making talismans and stumbled across your podcast, I think about 6 years ago. And it just feels like I'm just like giddy with excitement to be here. And so thank you so much for having me.
Uh, well, that's incredibly kind, Amelia, and thank you. I'm so honored that you enjoyed the podcast. And you and I were just chatting about this before we started recording. The honor is absolutely mine. I've been blown away for years now by your art, your esotericism, how you blend the two, those that cross pollination, that mingling of alchemy and astrology, and I love the full circle moments as well. It's incredibly lovely. And before we get into all that, though, Amelia, I think many listeners are familiar with you and your work, and follow you, and hopefully are, check the links below, supporting you on your excellent Kickstarter campaign, which we will talk about a little later. But can you just share with us, okay, how did someone like you, who has all these amazing paintings and wonderful magical themes, how did you first get into esotericism, magic, art? I mean, was this something that ran in the family? Was it one situation? Was it many over time? I mean, how did this all start for you?
That's a good question. And I feel like I'll kind of find the answer to as I start explaining it now. But I was always very fascinated with magic as a kid. I was very much into Harry Potter. I remember like every year really thinking I was going to get my letter from from the owls. I was definitely an unconscious animist as a kid. I had lots of stuffed animals. I had lots of stuffed animals with personalities that I would talk to that very much had a purpose. Was very in touch with nature, very curious. And I would say I really started to get into like the fundamentals of practical magic really during COVID time was when I started to really delve into practical occultism, doing actual practices myself, and that came after many years on the plant medicine path. After really delving into sort of these unconscious, unseen realms that I became more and more familiar with, and the the practical magic really started to take form through art, actually, um, because I had a calling to start incorporating ritual into my artwork. I didn't quite know how to do that. I just I just knew that that was going to be a thing. My best friend's actually a psychic medium, and during COVID time, during 2020, she had a vision of me doing a painting ritual, and neither of us really knew what that was. But I was like, okay, interesting, interesting. And through sort of gaining more information and delving into that more and more, I really came across the Hermetic arts and the idea of making talismans. And through talismans, there's a lot of planetary magic, astrological magic involved in that. And so that led me on a path through astrology, through occultism, through alchemy, and all really in service of making these magical objects out of my art.
That is, you bring up so many wonderful things that I just had 10 questions pop into my head. So, okay, so here you are, even with an actual vision of you initiating an actual art ritual. So maybe that's actually a really good place to start. So many people, Amelia, I know, so many listeners are very familiar with, of course, the grimoires and ritual magic and planetary timing and the lunar mansions and phases of the moon. But as an artist, as somebody who actually literally creates and, if you will, transcribes onto the canvas these esoteric themes, can you tell us, like, what are the big ingredients, if you will, or what are the big elements of putting a painting or crafting a painting? I mean, do you use a particular incense? Do you follow the day and hour of a specific planet? Do you mix anything in the oils and the paint? I mean, just anything and every. I think people would love to hear a little sneak peek into your process.
Mm. Yeah, I love that question. The answer is yes, anything and everything. So the way that I like to think about making particularly planetary talismans, art talismans, is I want to create a piece of art which reminds the painting of itself, so that it's actually compelled to enter that space. So that involves really, I think, if you think about sort of all the different planetary associations, you have the metal involved with the painting, you have the colors associated with the painting, you have its own iconography, and then that's just what's actually put into the painting. But then it's also how do you set up the space, how do you set the space, and maybe that we can talk about that in two parts. But yes, the answer is yes. As much as I can possibly put in as many associations as possible, really go into the piece itself and also go into the practice. I use planetary days, planetary hours. I really like the Orphic hymns. Singing the Orphic hymns is really important. I'll burn a particular incense that's associated with the planet. I wear a particular clothing that's the color that the planet is associated with. I usually will do an invocation ritual before I start the painting. That's specific to that planet. And then also, while I'm in the painting space, I have specific music that I listen to that makes me kind of get into the mindset of the planet itself.
Wow. So that really is like a fully, to me, a fully comprehensive approach that you take where it's almost like you have something in your mind, you get a feeling tone for, the kind of planet, the kind of energy that you're bringing into it, and then you basically use the planetary timing, the specific incenses. Is there a like you mentioned, for example, one of the evocatory, invocations or initial invocations that you do? Do you craft your own invocations? Do you kind of borrow from a grimoire? How do you incorporate that material as well?
Mm. Yeah, so I for the invocation rituals, I work with the Golden Dawn, the planetary invocation rituals, and I'll do the traditional mapping out over where this particular planet is with the hexagram, and then I'll actually use whatever paintbrush that I feel like I'm going to be using mostly during that painting session. I'll use that as my wand tool to invoke what's going on. And all my tools, all the painting tools I use are also consecrated. So I consider them very important as setting the space, and I'll consecrate those with particular incense beforehand and then use them to invoke the specific planetary archetype or spirit that I'm using to draw in. And then what I'll do, so this is sort of the ritual aspect of it, the beginning part of it, the ritual, and then I'll take the incense that I have burning, and I'll bring that sort of underneath the painting that I'm working on to make sure that the incense is actually like literally some fumigating into the painting itself. And then that's when I would sing the Orphic hymns to the painting. And yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. So we're
So
we're
there's
yeah, yeah, please go for
I
it.
was just gonna say there's before actually like even the painting practice itself, there's actually a great deal of ritual that goes into it, which um yeah, it can be a little bit daunting and definitely like did feel like a lot some days. But what I noticed is it it helps so much as to getting myself into the space and the mindset in order to create what needed to be output. And I would also find that some days maybe I was lazy or I didn't feel like I wanted to do the whole ritual.
Mhm.
It would feel like there would be a creative block or something, and I wasn't fully able to actually like get out what I needed to. And then if I step back and actually did the full ritual, it would come through so much more easeful.
Oh, interesting. So, and you mentioned getting overwhelmed at times. So I think this is something I've always been fascinated with esoteric artists like yourself, which is how do you choose the material, the planet, the piece that you would like to bring into the world? Or does the material choose you? Is this something that comes in a dream, a vision? Is it an intimation? Or for the planets, do you want to, go in order, from the first heaven and Luna and then Mercury and then Venus? Or is it just kind of, it comes instinctually? Or how does that happen? How do you choose what you
Hmm.
do?
How do I choose what I do? So really the main talismanic works I would say I did so far are the seven basics is what I call them, and they're seven planetary paintings, each based on a different planet. So those were just sort of I felt like those were the foundation as to stepping into this path in general, stepping into this talismanic way of creating art. And with those, there's already these common associations we have with each of the planets. So, for example, Venus being ruled, copper being ruled by Venus, and also Venus being associated with the color green. And thinking about, okay, so there's copper leaf embedded in the Venus painting. And then we also have malachite, which is a stone that's associated with Venus. And if you break it down, it's actually just copper sulfate. So it's more of the copper element in general. And I I don't think like as far as my experience and my process, there really wasn't that much like contemplation as to what would go in. It was more of just like, oh, these are all the things that are related to Venus. Like I have to put all these things in. So less about the actually contemplating and more about just finding the association in the first place.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I just love hearing you mention even about like the very subtle use of, specific metals or copper, like this holistic integration that you have in your pieces. And to that very point, Amelia, something as well that I've always wondered when it comes to, esoteric artists and just like that planetary aspect really, is do you see any separation between art and magic? And you might have your own, personal ritualistic practices, of course, whatever you're comfortable sharing. Or as an artist, do you just kind of like that is really obviously a very ritualistic process, but do you see any separation or is it really it is the same?
Ooh, I love that question. Yeah, I think that there really is something so overlapping about the two things. I think I'm thinking about the flow state in general and sort of this in-between realm that needs to be stepped into in both a magical practice and an artistic one, and how we really need to step out of our own way really when it comes to doing both things, and both really if they're done correctly, I feel like invoke a sort of trance state, and it's within this trance state that I think that we're really able to access these other realms and get these other downloads and messages that wouldn't be able to come through otherwise.
Okay, interesting. So this is so fascinating to me because I'm an appreciator of art and I cannot wait to get a little bit more to your specific tarot deck pieces as well. So as an artist, do you see yourself to that very point about like oh gosh, as a receiver of some kind of esoteric or spiritual message, as a translator, as a decryptor, as, a shamanistic figure on the edge of the village, like translating specific thing. I mean, how do you see
Mm.
yourself in that way as an artist?
Mm. Never really thought about that before. And I mean, honestly, I feel like a receiver because I feel like all of the messages that have been I sent through me, I'll say, I don't really feel like I can take that much credit for them. Like it very much feels like I happen to be chosen as a conduit to translate these particular images. Like the series that I did, I'd never really sat down to think like, okay, you know, how is this going to look, or what's the composition going to be like. That was never something that really happened. It was more of just like me listening to the painting itself. And for me, there's a very clear way of listening to the painting of how I make art, and it becomes this really beautiful relationship between myself and the painting, and it's almost like there becomes like this secret third entity that arises. And yeah, it very much feels like I'm being guided during the process.
That's amazing. I'm you're bringing up so many good points. I'm trying to take notes rapidly here, and I think I'm totally messing this up, but I love what you said a few minutes ago. Let me know if this is even somewhat right. That you said one of your goals is you want to create a painting or a piece that reminds it of the painting itself. So there seems to be this kind of like interaction of a piece of work that also just by engaging with it, either creating it or even looking on it, there's a relationship there. I don't know. Can you? I'm probably very clumsily phrasing that, but can you share more about that?
Yeah, so what I was touching on is when making a talismanic painting, specifically a planetary talisman. In order to do that, I'm wanting to create a painting that reminds the planet of itself. So it's taking as much associations, oops, sorry, as much associations as I possibly can, and then putting that into the painting so that the planet feels at home there. It's like the essence of the planet is within the painting, and then the planet then feels compelled to enter into the space. That spirit feels like it's welcome into that painting.
Gotcha. Oh, that's so lovely. And that just hearing you say that made me think of this. When it comes to talismans in general, at least in the Solomonic grimoire tradition, um, there's always this concept of like recharging, if you will, talismans
Mhm.
or pentacles, for example, thinking about the Key of Solomon and others. Is that something with a painting? Like, do you, I don't know, recharge, if you will, or reconsecrate or re-incense a painting, or is the talismanic act once you do it, it kind of just lives and breathes in that space?
Ooh, that's a really good question. And yeah, I mean, so while working the paintings, I was doing these talismanic rituals every time I was painting. So this was over the course of about 2.5 years of because it took me a long time to paint them. And so each time that I worked the painting, I would, which was on the respected day of the week. So I had 7 different planetary paintings that I was working all at the same time. And so every day I would have a different painting that I would work. And so the ritual would start, and I would do the specific, invocation ritual for the painting that day. And then of course, during specific planetary elections, there were more more elements that went in during those specific days that I would look for. Like for example, like during the Venus moon conjunction in Taurus, that was when I added the copper leaf to my Venus painting. So there were specific things that I was watching for as I was painting, but it was each of the paintings were this ongoing talismanic process. So it wasn't necessarily a like one and done like most talismans are. I would say when I started each of the paintings, that was a very intentional election that I looked at. So that would be more of like, okay, there was this specific talismanic election that I did when initiating the painting itself, and that ritual also was way more in depth than the ones I would do every single day. And then during, specific auspicious elections, I'd also do kind of more specific things for that painting. And then I did sort of the end, like the culmination when I, knew like, okay, this will be the last sort of thing that I do. That was also a significant time. But they were, yeah, each one of them was almost this like rolling talisman. And that was an experiment. So I don't quite know the like sort of how they're gonna become in the future, or like if I will need to recharge them. I've been traveling for about 6 months, and they've been at various homes of friends of mine. So I'm curious if they, when I visit them, if they'll still have this potency. But I believe that they do.
And these are not, I mean, don't get me wrong, there are so many wonderful, paintings and pieces that are, very micro, very small. These are not small paintings. Can you talk about, I mean, these are like, I'll see some of the posts that you make. I mean, how many materials and consecrated brushes and inks and pigments and, kind of finely shaved metals or whatever else you like, how much does it actually take to like put into or to have a completed painting? Because these are not small. These are not small paintings.
No, they're not small. But each one is 40 inches by 30 inches. Um, yeah, I mean, to give you like a a tangible amount, I don't think I could, but each one is at least, hundreds of hours of work, and over like a 2.5 year period. And it was also, it felt so critical every day to work on these paintings, because it was like if I skipped a day, then I wouldn't have until the next week in order to work on that painting. And so it was like every day was like essentially like a week's amount of work. And I my goal was to complete all of them while Saturn was in Aquarius. So yeah, so each of the each of the paintings were done when the planet was either in exaltation or domicile for all of the planets. And so with Saturn and Aquarius, that doesn't happen again for another, like, I think at least like 15 to 20 years, until Saturn goes into Libra when Saturn is exalted. So that's the next time that we might be able to get that sort of alignment.
That's unbelievable. And it's one of those things where when you just as someone like myself who beholds or appreciates your work, um, I just see the end result. But unless you give us a sneak peek, with all of the hundreds of hours that go into it and the preparation and the ritualistic timing, I think it's very easy for someone, to just take that for granted. And so that's why, and listeners, if you're watching this, by the way, on YouTube, as you've been seeing during this interview, we're putting some screenshots of Amelia's wonderful work on the screen. And so a question that I had, Amelia, for you is, when you present this, when you actually are ready to share one of your planetary paintings, let's say, into the world, do you get like similar feedback from people, or do people have their own, like they'll kind of come to you with their own interpretations of a painting, or it'll be very consistent, or like what does that feel like as an artist to release something into the world and then all of a sudden you start getting this feedback?
Oh man, it's its own beast for sure. Like, uh, it's it's such a practice of releasing my own work, because it very much feels like a child. It's like I've had this like super nurturing, intimate relationship with this thing for, years, and like no one sees it, and it's just like, okay, this is my like baby, and like, it hasn't been seen. And then I share it with the world, and like, I mean, especially on like Instagram. Instagram is so funny because like, you have the algorithm, and it's like sometimes like no one will see, this painting that I put out into the world. And so that's its own sort of feeling that I have to like run through within itself, of just like all the self-esteem that comes up with that, of like, wow, I just worked so hard on something and like no one cares. That's its own sort of box. And then there's the other box of, you know like it really just being a child. And there's the expression of like separating the art from the artist, and how really, like, once I release it into the world, like how much of it can I really have as like my own possession, like similar to like a child or something. Like, we birth a child and then they're just like on their own journey doing their own thing. And so that's been such a practice and a process for me, of like releasing these paintings as their own beings, and letting them kind of just live their own lives. And there's been some really, really beautiful experiences I've had with sharing my work with people. And one of my friends, I remember, she was one of the first people to see them all after I had finished them. And I did them one by one. So I started with Saturn, and then I went in Chaldean order, and like I basically was like, okay, close your eyes. And then I'd like put it in front of her, and she'd open her eyes, and like she was just like had this awestruck experience with all of them. And by the end of going through all the seven, she was like, I don't know if I can drive home. Like like she said that she was having this like full energetic experience where she felt like she was like on a drug or something, is how she described it. So yeah, the I guess like the that was the long answer to your question. The short answer to your question is it has so many mixed bags of emotions. And I'm still navigating that, actually, like, and figuring out, like, how do I step back from this creation that I feel so much ownership around, and then at the same time allowing it to really be its own entity, because I've also created it with that intention in mind.
That's incredibly from an artistic perspective. It reminds me so much of um, in the Solomonic world and with kind of the grimoires. You hear about, of course, many registers of spirits, and how a magician will have a deep relationship with one or two spirits, or develop a particular relationship with spirits. And it sounds like, as an artist, tell me if this is at least even approaching somewhat fair, but it sounds like you really are, you're creating these planetary, talismanic infused paintings. In a way, as an artist, you're kind of, I mean, would it be fair to say you're kind of the author of your own grimoire, if you will,
Mhm.
in a way? I don't know if
Oh,
that's
I
fair,
love
but
that. I
yeah.
know. I mean, you could say that. I like that a lot. Yeah, definitely. And the really my main, I mean, it's grown since I created these paintings, but in the beginning, one of my main intentions in creating these paintings was to be able to translate the feeling and the spirit and the energy of the planet in a visual and tangible way. So, as someone that was studying astrology, I wanted to have a tool where I could be like, oh, you don't know what Venus is? Look at this. Just look at this painting, and have someone have a full understanding and a full sensory experience of that planet just by looking at the painting.
I love that. And especially is there something to Amelia with directly to that point? Like you're showing a Venusian painting or a solar painting. I almost feel like there's something about the visual medium that it, as soon as you look at it, it bypasses your conscious mind. Like it bypasses the rationality, the kind of subjective filters that we have up. You know, there's no hearing of words and retranslating in your brain. It's just like a direct. Does it, do you find that
Mm.
when you share that kind of like with your friend, you're sharing that and almost just this overwhelming feeling? Like, is there, what is it about the visual medium that really you think there's, pardon the horrible pun, but there's magic there? Like, what is it about the visual medium with that?
So something that I really love to think about is so music, another art form. So with music, it's only available to us in this specific present time moment. So when we listen to a song, there's, the notes and the pauses, and okay, there is just like that piece of guitar chord right there during that moment. Now it's gone. And it's like, it's a fleeting form of art. We can continue to listen to the same song over and over again, but it's still fleeting. It's fleeting before us every moment. And what I think is so profound about art, about looking at a piece of art, and why I think so much good art has remained so timeless, is because it exists outside of time. So we can view a piece of artwork, and it completely encompasses the space, and it foregoes our need for time. We can sit there and we can just look at one piece of it for as long as we're able, right? And then through our eyes we can navigate around the surface and tell our own story through how we're looking at it, and what order we're looking at it. And it's stagnant before us. It stays there and it doesn't move. And so in that, we're able to give ourselves this fully immersive experience. And I think that also lends itself to the magic of it, because we're able to access that liminal space without a specific endpoint.
I never thought of that before in that way. That's I really appreciate you sharing that because you're so right. Like with music, for example, it's you hear a wonderful note or chord progression or whatever it is, but it just it passes as soon as it's there. And yet with a piece of art, you know, like when I was first looking at your art, something about it too, Amelia, directly to that point about bypassing the constraints, the Malkuthian constraints of space time, is there seems to be something also of your art and esoteric artists and art and like poetry, where like if you possess a poem by memory, for example, I think in some sense the poem possesses you. And I
Mm.
think that with your art too, if you really do take the time, and I've had this experience with your art and other pieces, but it's almost like, and I love your thoughts from the creator's side of this, you know, as someone who's kind of the genesis of these pieces, but there really is this sense of like once you sit and absorb and kind of receive, you know, and gaze at a painting for so long, that stays with you and that memory, like you can walk away even from it, and yet the colors and the textures and the hues and the mingle, like there's something that possess, if you possess a painting by memory, there's something in the painting that possesses you. I don't know if I'm phrasing that right, but there is something about memory as well that I think visual arts tie into.
Mm. I do like that. Yeah. Yeah, it's making me like it's something to chew on for me. I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
No, thank you. It's wonderful just to hear how you share about this. And in fact, this brings up another element because I do want to get to your lovely tarot deck because this is going to be great. I want to hear all about how how you first got into it and everything. But before that, you've talked about astrology, which is excellent. I just love hearing about the different timings and exaltations and specific timing. And you've spoken about the planetary timing. One of the other themes that you have in your paintings and in the tarot deck, which we'll definitely get into, but one of the themes is alchemy.
Mm.
And can you share with the listeners a little bit about alchemy and what is alchemy from the perspective of an esoteric artist like yourself? Is the canvas a vessel? Are there specific themes that you enjoy using regarding alchemical symbolism? Like, how do you approach or integrate alchemy in your art?
Yeah, so I developed this technique really during this series. While I was working with alchemy, I was very involved in the plant path of alchemy, and Paracelsus was a big inspiration into the seven basics is what I call my series, and the seven basics comes from Paracelsus, his initiation into the alchemical path. So in alchemy, you have the three prima materia. You have sulfur, which is the soul. You have spirit, which is the mercury, and you have salt, which represents the body. So, in just sort of the fundamentals of alchemy, we're all in all things possess these three prima materia. So, as an oil painter, in the traditional craft of oils, there's three main components within oil painting. You have the paint pigment itself, you have the oil that's accompanied with the paint, and then you have a mineral spirit, which is also the paint thinner. So, how I think about it is I think of the mineral spirit as the mercury or the spirit aspect, the sulfur as the soul, being the linseed oil, and then the pigment paint is the body. And so, when I'm working a painting, I start out with mineral spirits. And if you're familiar with the technique of oil painting, it's traditional to go from lean to fat. And so that means you're working with the thinnest material first and then building onto your canvas into the most thick material. And this is just the technical aspect of it. So when I start a painting, I use primarily mineral spirits. And the mineral spirits I see as the mercury element, the spirit element. And I consider this the universal spirit. So it's during this phase of the painting that I'm really focused on getting out of my own way and just letting the almost the liquid like material of the mineral spirit tell the story in the way that it wants to interpret itself. So I'll start out with just a little tiny bit of pigment because otherwise you're not going to see anything at all. So I'll have a little bit of pigment with the mineral spirit. And then what I'm trying to do as I'm applying paint is I'm trying to get out of my own head about the way that I think painting should be applied to a canvas. So it's a lot of movement, specifically with the planetary paintings. I'm moving in a way that feels aligned with the way that the planet might move. So then the next phase is the sulfur phase or the soul phase of the painting. So during that time, I start to actually add the oil, the linseed oil, into the paint to create like a more oily texture. And at that point, when I think about the difference between soul and spirit, the spirit being the universal spirit, I think of the soul as our individual essence. It's sort of this personality. It's what gives the essential oil in a plant. So it's like what makes the lavender smell like lavender, right? And like a rose smell like a rose. So it has its own flavor, its own personality that's very personal to the thing. So when I'm working with the linseed oil, that's when I actually put myself into the equation. And I don't go into that phase until I feel like the spirit has kind of revealed itself to me. It's sort of shown me what's going to come next. And I think about it in the way of like finding pictures in clouds or something like that. Like there's kind of just this mess, but then okay, I can kind of see a shape here. And so then I come in with the soul aspect, which is, I call this making executive decisions, where I'm just like, okay, this is what it is. Like, I'm going to come in and I'm going to build this way with the sulfur, with the linseed oil. And this is also the sort of like, if you're familiar with the painting process, this is like the blocking part of the painting. So this is when I'm making very big shapes, but I'm again making executive decisions as to like, this is going to be a dog and this is going to be a person, and I'm making a distinct outline. So the sulfur phase becomes kind of the longest part of the painting process. And then once everything has taken enough shape, then I go into the salt phase or the body phase. And at that point, I'm just adding pigments into the painting. And that's also the time where I would add like the metals, or like the specific minerals that I'm working with, the minerals being like the different rocks, something like that. And in that way, it's been this sort of alchemical process that has happened through the painting.
Wow. Okay, you just blew my mind with that because I had no idea that there was my knowledge of painting is absolutely zero. I am a total beginner in terms of learning. So hearing you describe it from kind of more there's this linear progression in the three steps from kind of more ethereal. I've been taking some notes here. So the mineral spirit phase, that kind of that Mercury phase, it kind of reveals itself in this kind of ethereal way. What is it trying to say? How does it want to be portrayed? And that's the lightest phase regarding the actual application. And then moving on to the sulfur, the soul, the oil, the linseed oil, where you're adding the paint, you're kind of adding your, which I think this is fascinating, your individual personality. You're putting yourself into that. And then really quick, you mentioned executive decisions, which I love because I can only imagine, I don't know if this is right at all, but I can only imagine as an artist, if you don't make an executive decision, you could probably look at the canvas and just instantly always see every single or so many possibilities, but then nothing would get put on the canvas. I don't know if that's even right, but is that kind of why you kind of say, hey, executive decision time, we have to put something down?
Yeah, I mean, it's also just the style that I work with, but as you were saying that, like a part of me wanted to be like, oh, like abstract art, but then I'm like, I don't think I can actually say that for certain. Like I'm sure that abstract artists are making executive decisions, but it feels like for me the executive decision time, like it's like me coming in being like, okay, like I see this, like we're going in. And the executive decision is also like using a reference photo, like, oh, okay, like I want this like very completely rendered, Venus image. Then I'm gonna have to like specifically take an image of Venus and be like, okay, it's that one. She's going right there. Like I see where she is.
Yes, yes, that's lovely. Thank you. I just love that. I just love that process, and there really is. You can tell. and we'll get into this a little bit more with your tarot deck. There's a richness, I think, to your painting, like the colors, the vibrancy, the contrast. Like there's something very, I don't want to say sharp or definitive because I get this kind of ethereal softness in your work as well, but it's very visceral. Like it kind of just comes out at you, like the reds and the pinks, and depending on the planetary, the green, Netzach, Venus, right? The kind of just wonderful hues. Um, and I guess this might be the best time, Amelia, to talk about this because okay, you have the kind of Paracelsian seven, you have these wonderful paintings, and you have this infusion of alchemy and electional astrology and timing. And then you decide to take on a project which is incredible and talk about so many variations on reality. It's hard to name one more than a tarot deck. And so I listeners check out the link below because the Astro Magician's Tarot, Amelia, that you've created. Please and again, we will put photos up on the screen so people can check out if you are describing, say, a few of the cards in detail. How did you come up with this? What was the genesis that you said, okay, I'm going to do an entire tarot deck and with very particular themes?
Hmm. So this is also like one of the parts where I can't take that much credit for it because they really just came through. Like the the tarot deck was such, it felt like it had its own volition the whole time. Like so it started really with grokking each of the planets and coming up with as much associations as possible, and this idea of like, creating a painting and creating a space which reminded the painting of itself. So through the grokking process, I was searching and researching all the different associations and iconography that were, associated with the planet itself. And the first like icon to show up in the series, in all the 7 series, was the High Priestess. And she's associated with the Moon card. And what's also really cool about the moon is it moves most quickly in the sky out of all the other paintings. And also I'll say, like, I started the moon painting not last, but it was like 6th of 7, and it was by far the first painting that I finished. Like it was done like very quickly compared to all the rest. Like I think the moon painting took me like maybe a year and a half, while all the other ones took me about 2.5 years. So it was like very much like the moon coming in and being the quick um planetary body. But so the High Priestess came in first, and then as I kept developing more and more of the paintings, I was automatically, or not automatically, but I knew that I needed to put in the zodiac associations of each of the planets, of all the zodiacs that the planet rules within the painting itself. And I kind of just, got to thinking about like, okay, like, we have some tarot cards here. Like we have, there's some here, but like what would it look like if all, what would that just look like if all of them were there? And I started to really think about it. And it became a thing where it was like, oh my God, like they're all in there. Like all of them are in there. Like just by looking at the astrological symbol, the card itself was right there, which where I'd already put them. Maybe there was a handful that weren't fully developed that I kind of just had to like do a little bit of thinking about. But for the most part, it really just came through, and the deck was almost like a non-intentional byproduct of the seven basics, at least the major arcana.
That is incredible. And okay, one of the things that really struck me too is how you give so much personality to an individual expression that variates completely. I mean, for example, some cards have almost like you'll look at one and appreciate one, and it's totally different. So, for example, I have here the Emperor card and the Ace of Swords, right? These two to me seem to be coming from in some ways similar, but in some ways completely different areas of reality. And the vibrancy, the deep reds and the specific vibrancy of the Emperor card, and then this kind of like almost hero-esque, just kind of softer, kind of ethereal, auraic gold coming through with the Ace of Swords. So you have these two, for instance, and again, just like we're going to get to some tips on how people can appreciate art in general, but also work with your deck. But there's these. But then on the other side, Amelia, and of course, any cards that you'd like to discuss as well. Then there's this beautiful holisticism. So, for example, with of course the Fool and the Magician, unlike say some other more traditional tarot decks, they're part of a whole. I mean, they're really part of this beautiful reality, and I'm doing a bad job lining it up, but the Fool and the Magician are completing in a way, or telling another side of the story. So how did you decide which cards have this holisticism to them versus cards that might be more standalone? I mean, it's just amazing how you treated that. So yeah, anything you can share about your process, I think would be so fascinating.
Mm. So, yeah, specifically with the Fool and the Magician. So those are both on the Mercury painting. And Mercury is in within the Mercury painting itself. I have Hermes Trismegistus, I have Thoth, and then I also have the god Hermes, or like the Mercury god. And so that was one of those where, when I was looking at the Mercury painting, I was like, okay, I think that, Hermes should be Hermes Trismegistus, like your boy. I think he should be the magician. And that made sense to me. And then it was, okay, literally mirroring the magician, but turned away. I have this illustration of the Flammarion engraving, which is the Fool card. So it's the guy turning away on the chessboard, and the chessboard being the 8x8 square, which is known as the game of Mercury. So uh, a lot of inspiration I got from the cards, or like with the cards, was from the oh gosh, I'm blanking right now, even though I was reading them so much, but the comic book where she goes through the tree of life.
Yes, I know what you're talking about. The name escapes me. But yeah, so you were using that as inspiration and as a way of kind of researching to make those executive decisions and bring that into the deck. Would that be somewhat fair?
Yes, and it was happening kind of simultaneously. So there were like we should I'm gonna probably just like blurt out the name of it as soon as it comes to me. But for example, like the Emperor card is from where they go into the Giborach sphere. Um, Promethea.
Yes, yes.
Promethea.
There you go. Well, you
Yeah.
you did it exactly. Yep.
Um, but what was also happening simultaneously is like, so when they go into the Chesed sphere, I had already been like pretty involved in my Jupiter painting at that point, but it felt like we had both accessed the same energy, because like Promethea also has this beautiful, like blue and white ethereal quality to it that I didn't like. That was an unconscious decision for me in the Jupiter painting. So I think like it was both inspiring and also very affirming for me to use that source of just like, oh wow, like I think I got it. Like I think I'm getting the messages here. So when thinking about okay, what is going to be the Fool card, that felt that was one that I had to kind of just okay, like, you know, on which painting, which one is kind of vacant. But then it made sense because it's right next to the Magician, and we have 0 and we have 1, and the Fool is also the air element, which Mercury is to me the most air associated planet that we have. Um and like also one of the ones that I kind of decided on, meaning like they weren't so obvious to me, was the Judgment card. So, Judgment card, it has the Pythia from the Oracle of Delphi at the Temple of Apollo, and then we have Apollo up here. And as we know, you know, all over ancient Greece, people would go on pilgrimages to go consult the Oracle of Delphi in order to gain prophecy, and it was like a point of judgment in that way. And the Judgment card is the element of fire, and it's in the sun painting.
How amazing is that? And okay, so this gets to a great question though, because you mentioned the zodiac and you mentioned and again the integration of the elements. So of course the element of fire, the Oracle of Delphi. When you were putting these together and when you were actually arranging the deck, did you use or incorporate for each of the cards astrological timing, zodiacal timing? I mean, can you tell us about like did you use the same process as the original 7 planetary paintings, or were there things that were different with this?
Yeah, so with all the major arcana, all the 22 major arcana, those are all within the 7 planetary paintings I did. And so each of those cards were done during astrological timings based off of the zodiac, so the zodiac timings. So like the moon card, Pisces, you know, Jupiter and Pisces. And of course, like as much associations as I can, as I could do. Like while I was doing the painting process, Jupiter was in Aquarius a little bit, but pretty much in Pisces the majority of the time. And so I took advantage of Jupiter being in Pisces on Thursdays, but it wasn't like it was also like, oh, now I'm doing the Temperance card. The sun is in Sagittarius because I couldn't actually have Jupiter in Sagittarius during that time. So, yes, all the major arcana were done during zodiacal astrological elections, depending on, you know, what sort of element I was working with. And that was very intentional, and I would just track the calendar that way of like, okay, we're, you know, what month are we in, where's the sun, what painting am I working on today, like, oh, okay, Mercury's in Virgo, I really have to finish my Hermit card during this time, like that sort of thing. The minor arcana um, aren't done astrologically. They were done elementally. So each one, so they're the same size paintings as the planetary paintings, except for they're flipped vertically, and they map over the tree of life, starting with the archangel as the ace of that element is the Keter sphere. So at the very top, and then it goes to Hokman Binah, being the 2 and the 3, the 4 and the 5 of Hesed and Gaborah, and then 6, the Tiferet in the center, Netzach to Hod, the 7 and the 8, and then the 9 and the 10, Yesod and Malkut, at the bottom. And so starting with the ace at the top as the Keter, and then with the 2, it begins a specific alchemical process that's going to be associated with that element. So and then also touching on, so each of those paintings were started during the equinox or solstice that it's associated with. So the cups painting being associated with fall, that was started during the fall equinox. And it starts out with the 2 as they're picking the grapes, and it's kind of like Dionysian themed, and it goes through down the tree of life until the 10 of cups being the culmination, which is okay, now like everyone's drunk and they're dancing. And then the pentacles was started during the winter solstice. So same structure of those, starting with harvesting the grains and then going all the way down into a family sharing a meal together. It's the process of making bread, pentacles. And then the next one is swords, which was the spring equinox, and that's the forge process. And then fire wands was started during the summer solstice, and that's the alchemical process. And that one was actually the hardest of all the paintings that I did, just because of how much research it went into that particular painting. Because I don't know if you've ever like tried to look up the alchemical process, but it's not like it's kind of a cult. Like it's a little bit hard to find the exact thing. And so it took me a while to really hone in on like, okay, how do I get all these steps into essentially 9 different paintings minus the archangel at the top. And then of course the archangels are the sort of Western magic golden dawn associations of so we have Michael as the Ace of Wands, Raphael is the Ace of Swords, Gabriel the Ace of Cups, and then Uriel the Ace of Pentacles.
I'm blown away because nothing against the other tarot. I mean, there are so many excellent, interesting tarot decks. But what I love, among many other things, about just hearing you describe the minor arcana is, please, I'd love for you to share more about this. You made an intentional choice to carry within 9 cards or so an entire step, like the making of bread or this kind of, Bacchus, Dionysian revelry with the fruit of the vine. What made you make that intentional choice? Because a lot of decks that you might see, obviously they're so unique and different, but a lot of them might feel a little disconnected to me, like you look at one suit and the suit is just, totally different people doing different things or different scenarios. You had this incredible holisticism. What was behind that? What made you say, for the minor arcana for these 4 suits, I really want to tell a story. Like what was behind that?
Hmm. I mean, really, it was, I mean, a lot of it was okay. I know that I want to overlay this onto the tree of life. That felt extremely important to me. And then thinking about the elemental associations and also what the suit itself was meaning, what it really embodied, and what would be an alchemical process, a story that could be told in steps in order to really convey the message of that suit. So, with the pentacles painting, the process of making bread, like there's something, so concrete about like literally like making dough, like money, and like having this, tangible like resource, and bread being something that we literally put into the body, into the physical realm, and we get it from the earth. And it was something that, just really clicked and made sense. And then the same for all the other, like cups was a little bit more obvious, because I think like cups is cups, the process of making wine, like that's just kind of like, oh yeah, of course, right? And then the swords being the forge process, that one is also a little bit obvious, but also came with like, a good amount of research, because like I didn't know how to do metallurgy or that type of art. Um, and then yeah, with the fire, the alchemical process, that was another one that I had to really conceptualize for a while before it really made sense. And also something I went back and forth about was like, okay, is that too like abstract of an idea to like do the alchemical process? But then it I mean, I think it just makes sense with my deck as a whole, of having the alchemy in there. And the images that I took, a lot of them were inspired by the Splendor Solis, which the 14th century alchemical text that's just in pictures. And so the the Six of Wands is really kind of that main image of having that flask. And normally it's the flask with the peacock inside of it. And I do have the peacock in there, but the peacock is the Eight of Swords. The Eight of Wands. I'm also trying to find it, the Six of Wands. But yeah, the conjunction. That's the step of the conjunction of having. I found it first.
Ah, you beat me to it. I'm
I beat
furiously.
you.
There it
But yeah,
is.
so
Yep.
this is Rubus, the hermaphrodite, representing the
Ah,
conjunction element on the sixes. Or
wow.
on the six.
That's incredible. That's incredible. And I just hearing you share about again the intentionality of it, and this kind of, I mean, of course, mapping onto the tree of life, but also telling a story. I think that's so not, typically seen in many other areas. And so I love this. And so I think this brings up, Amelia, a few other things as well, which is, do you have any recommendations on if there are practitioners listening to this, and how can people best use your deck? And I know, people can use it for whatever they want, of course, but do you have any recommendations about, from an esoteric perspective, about anything that you'd recommend when using your deck, or anything around that? I think would be super helpful.
Yeah. So other than, of course, yeah, the traditional ways of using the tarot,
Hmm.
I I really was contemplating this while making the deck, and also while thinking about what would be the purpose of making artistic talismans, of paintings into talismans. And I thought a lot about the the chain of being, and sort of this relationship that we have to spirit, and specifically thinking about prayer, and thinking about manifesting, and bringing things forth. And the way that tarot typically works, I don't actually know, but the way that I think about it is, spirit communicates with us through symbols. Through We have these traditional associations with things, and through symbolic meanings, through synchronicities, spirit is able to communicate certain things to us. And so this is kind of how tarot works: is, oh yes, I see this makes sense, Thank you for that information, Spirit. I will go accordingly, right? I do believe that as divine beings, we have the ability to communicate back. The same way that spirit lets us communicate, I think that we can also communicate through the same symbolic language. So I think we can take, a talismanic painting, um, or take a spread of tarot cards and actually translate what we're trying to gain, or what we're trying to make manifest as a way of prayer and pictures. And so I think that this deck, because it was done during these very intentional astrological timings, these cards itself possess this talismanic quality to them. And so I think we can use them as almost a reverse divination tool. So we can take these cards and we can actually signal the opposite way of sort of this Jacob's ladder that goes both ways. And we can, oh, I would like to bring more love into my life. So I'm going to put the emperor and the empress together on my altar. And I'm going to, divine on this particular date and time, and make an intention to bring this into my life.
Wow, I love that. Yes. So if I'm understanding it right, which is such a great, what a great phrase, by the way, a reverse divination tool. I really like that. So effectively, whereas traditional divination, let's say, which is great and lovely, it's showing you, illuminating what is or what likely could be coming. Like this month, this day. You flip that on its head. The reverse divination tool is using the same materia, the same divination tools like tarot, but instead of trying to glean some kind of information from the future as almost like a passive way, this is shifting it where you are intentionally bringing it in. Would that be somewhat okay to phrase it
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah, I love that way of wording it. Definitely. Like an active, instead of the passivity of the divination, you're actively doing the reverse.
I love that. Now, okay, this also uh I promise last question here because I again just like with there's like at least 85 other things popping into my head, but I always hear about with tarot too, specific cards. I know some people might, and I think this ties to your point about how to best appreciate art that we were talking about earlier, but some people take just one individual card and they do like a scrying session with it. They'll actually go into the card and they'll use a kind of meditative trance and a contemplative mystical procedure to go in. Is that something that you recommend, or is that something that potentially these cards could be used? I mean, because I can only imagine as an artist, each of these cards, even though many are part of the larger planetary paintings, each of these cards I could see as being an entire world that you could use in a scrying sense. I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on that potential?
I love that. I've never given that much thought, but I love it, and it makes me kind of think about the thing I was saying earlier of really releasing my idea of even having ownership around these paintings as the artist, and letting them exist as their own entity and being. And with that, I'm very interested to know, what people find from their own practice with them, and what resonates with people in their own ways.
That's awesome. Yeah, I can imagine you will be getting a lot of different takes and facets on the deck itself. And I definitely, Amelia, want to talk about, of course, how people can support you, your future projects. But listeners, check the links below because Amelia, I'd love for you to share about this. For this deck to fully become a reality, It is right now as we speak. There's a Kickstarter campaign going on to raise the necessary funds so that it can be produced uh, fully. And this Kickstarter campaign, again, the link are in the video and podcast descriptions below. Listeners, check it out. I just contributed to Amelia's lovely Kickstarter project. It's so great. Can you tell us a little bit about Amelia? Not only the Kickstarter campaign, but just why it's important, and necessary to support this work. I mean, to help bring it into the world. I mean, because it's such a great project. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. So, right now my Kickstarter is happening. I started out with a 40-day campaign, and I got the 40 days from the philosophical month, which is traditional for an alchemical tincture process, is using the 40 days for the thing to really marinate and go through its alchemical transition. So far, this deck has been fully organically crowdfunded. So I haven't used advertising companies. It's just been fully funded organically of people that I know and word of mouth. And my goal is to raise 15,000 in order to fund the first 500 limited edition decks. So the 1,500 is just how much it will cost me to produce the 500 decks. That's actually not um like profit money. That's just like that's how much it costs for me to baseline make the deck itself. And then from there, I hope to continue to bring it out into the world. But yeah, it's definitely like kind of a costly process, something that I don't have my own funding for. So I definitely need help. I need supporters. I need sharers. I need sharers. I need people sharing the deck in order to sort of bring it out to fruition, at least for this first phase of the deck development. And then once that happens, I do see myself making more additions and continuing to like bring it further into the world. But it's really this sort of initial step in the process that's going to be really crucial in order to bring it forth.
Listeners, I gotta say, to Amelia's point, this is what it's all about. I mean, when we hear about the esoteric community, quote unquote, or supporting the people you believe in, I think that is so important. And actually, putting your money where your mouth is, like if you have any amount, that's the beautiful thing about this Kickstarter campaign. Any amount can help bring this deck into reality. And so check out the podcast and video descriptions below, the URLs below, of course, which is yeah, it's thank you, Amelia, for sharing about that. And the Kickstarter obviously is going to be going for a few more weeks here. But even after the Kickstarter campaign ends, Amelia, can you share with listeners how else can listeners support you and check out your work? Of course, we'll link to your lovely Instagram below. But how else would you like listeners to support you and just check out all of the things that you're up to?
Yeah, so sounds like shameless plug time. So I I my website is ameliapasser.com. I offer astrology readings. So I do natal astrology readings and I also do elections for people. So that involves looking at auspicious dates for specific tasks, announcements, important dates that you're looking at, maybe wedding date, or maybe you're trying to launch your own Kickstarter, this sort of thing. I can look at dates for that. I have an Etsy shop where I make various merch. A lot of it is planetary themed. So I made a whole line of planetary themed clothing that you can wear during the day of the week. So you can feel more connected to the planets that way. Um, I do plan on continuing to make talismanic art and talismanic paintings. So that's something that I'm very passionate about, very called to do more of. So You can do commissions with me. That's something that I really want to start doing more of really seeing and experimenting with this idea of the reverse divination of how do we bring about this thing that you're trying to cultivate in your life, picking an election around like your birth chart and then doing a complete talismanic painting for you, with that in mind. And yeah, I'm around, so I love connecting with more occultists and spiritual esotericists. It's something I love to do. So um, yeah, feel free to reach out.
Oh, that's fantastic. Listeners, check out the links below because, in addition, of course, to the excellent Kickstarter campaign, all those different ways, the constellation of ways to support Amelia as well. Amelia, as we wrap up the podcast here, obviously, listeners, please not only check out all the links, but is there anything else, Amelia, that either about your tarot deck or about the process of art, painting, anything else that you would like to leave listeners with, or anything else that we didn't touch on that you'd like to delve more deeply into, would be great, or anything that comes to mind?
Hmm. I feel so complete. I feel like I was really able to touch on all the things that I wanted, at least right now. That's how it feels. But I'm so appreciative of you having me and of being here.
Oh my
Thank you.
gosh. Amelia, the honor is certainly mine. Artist, esotericist, creator, her latest Kickstarter campaign to support the Astro Magician's tarot deck. All of this is part of the day-to-day life of our guest today, Amelia Passer. And Amelia, the honor's mine. Thank you so much for stopping by and sharing your art and your wisdom on the podcast today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was so much fun, and yeah, was a goal of mine many years ago of maybe one day I'll be on Glitch Bottle. So I'm so honored. Thank you.